This chair's for real blood relatives. Get down now. That's what my dad yelled before he yanked the chair, making my son fall face first into his own birthday cake. 23 adults in the room just stood there like statues. Nobody moved. My 6-year-old son lay there, face covered in frosting, eyes wide open, not understanding what just happened. I didn't understand either. What did real blood relatives even mean? Then Dad said something else, and my 36 years of life came crashing down just as I had with that symbolic family chair. But when my mom spoke up, the truth hurt me more than any words ever could. And before I get into the details of this story, thanks for taking the time to listen to me today. Hello everyone, I'm Callister, an office worker for a logistics company in the Columbus, Ohio, suburbs. Steady job, decent pay, and most importantly, I get off on time every day to pick up my son from school. Sawyer, 6 years old, has been my whole world since my ex-wife cheated. Today's story begins at Sawyer's birthday party 6 months ago, but it really started 36 years ago, the day I was born. My family consisted of 4 people. Dad, Mom, me, and my younger brother Weston, who was 3 years behind me. Sounds normal, like any other family. But if you grew up in that house on Maple Street in Westerville, you'd see it was like a play where I was forever backstage while Weston always got the applause center stage. Dad loved Weston more than me. That was obvious, didn't need explaining. Weston brought home A's. Dad patted his shoulder and said, "Good job." I got home A's and Dad glanced over, asking why it wasn't an A+. Every night, Dad would hug Weston before bed and say, "Sleep tight, son." Me? I got a nod from across the room, indicating that Dad was in a good mood that day. When I turned 8, I asked Mom once while she was washing dishes, "Why does Dad always hug him but not me?" Mom stopped, turned to look at me for a long time, then sat down at eye level and said softly, "He's younger, gets sick a lot, so Dad worries about him more. But don't worry, I'll love you twice as much to make up for Dad's part." Then she hugged me. I remember the dish soap smell on her hands, and I recall that rare, warm feeling. I believed Mom. Believed because I needed to believe in something to get out of bed the next day. So, I grew up thinking I wasn't good enough, that I wasn't special enough, and accepted it like breathing every day with my allergy-ridden nose. Uncomfortable but incurable. Until Sawyer's birthday party. The first time it was held at Mom and Dad's house after years of my finding excuses to avoid it. The house had a big yard for kids to run around, a living room with enough space for 20-something people, and a truth that had been waiting for me for 36 years that I never knew about. My parents' house, Harold and June's, in Westerville, still looked the same. Family photos covering the living room walls, apple pie smell drifting from the kitchen, and that antique Windsor chair still sitting majestically at the head of the dining table like a king on his throne. That chair was my dad's most incredible pride, perhaps even more than his own children. He told and retold the story about it every holiday. Grandpa bought it from a wood shop in Pennsylvania in 1920, and it had been passed down through 4 generations. It was initially made from white oak, featuring a curved back and spindles that are still intact. Once an antique expert came to appraise it, he said it was worth approximately $12,000. From then on, Harold looked at that chair as if it were a treasure. Unspoken rule in the house, only special people got to sit on it. And for 36 years, I'd never sat on it once, not even in childhood birthday photos. However, I didn't care much. It looked really old-fashioned, and I hated that. Weston arrived with his wife and daughter at 3 p.m. My brother, 33, is the chief accountant for a company in downtown Columbus, always the one mentioned most when Dad talks to neighbors. But Weston was different from him. He never looked at me with comparing or condescending eyes. As soon as he saw me, Weston walked over for a tight hug and patted my back. "Callister, it's been forever, how are you doing?" Paisley, Weston's daughter, 7 years old, curly blonde hair like a doll, ran over to Sawyer and hugged her cousin tight, yelling, "Sawyer, I missed you. Come play with me." The 2 kids grabbed hands and ran to the backyard, their clear laughter echoing through the house. They were so innocent, unaware of the complications adults created for one another. My dad sat in the living room with a bourbon in his hand. When I walked in, he glanced up and nodded, face showing no expression. But when Paisley ran over, Harold immediately put his glass down, his face lighting up. He opened his arms to welcome his granddaughter, lifted the little girl, and said with a bright smile, "There's Grandpa's precious granddaughter. Come here for a hug." I swallowed that familiar feeling down. After 36 years, I'd mastered this skill. The party went on with relatives from both sides. Kids ran around outside. Adults gathered inside with beer, wine, and small talk. Everything was peaceful until Richard, my dad's cousin, saw Sawyer run by and turned to ask, "Hey Harold, how come this kid doesn't look like anyone in the family? Dark hair, brown eyes, while our whole bloodline's all brown hair, blue eyes." My dad took a sip of his drink, smiled slightly, and answered in a tone like he was telling a joke. "Who knows? Maybe Callister picked him up somewhere." A few people chuckled. I didn't laugh. My hand gripped the beer can tight, but I swallowed it down. Today was Sawyer's day, not a day for me to start trouble. When the cake was brought out with 6 flickering candles, my mom put her hand on Sawyer's shoulder and said gently, "Sawyer, today's your birthday. You get to sit on this special chair to blow out your candles." My dad wasn't there at that moment. He was in the next room getting another bottle. Sawyer's eyes went wide, lit up bright. My son climbed onto the Windsor chair, both legs swinging because they couldn't reach the ground, tiny hands touching the polished wooden spindles. Then Sawyer turned to find me in the crowd, voice full of pride. "Dad, I get to sit on this throne. Do I look like a prince?" I smiled encouragingly and joined the whole family singing happy birthday. I stood next to the table, phone up, recording video, chest feeling unusually warm. Sawyer closed his eyes, hands clasped in front of his chest, lips moving, making some wish. The candlelight flickered, reflecting on my son's face, and in that moment, I thought this would be a beautiful birthday. Then Harold walked into the room with a bourbon bottle in his hand. And that's when the storm began. Everything happened in less than 10 seconds, and I saw his eyes stop on Sawyer. Not surprised eyes, not annoyed eyes. It was something colder, more profound. Something that even though I'd been his son for over half my life, I'd never seen before. He slammed the bottle down on the table. Not a word. Slow but purposeful steps. Like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. The entire room was still singing happy birthday, but the voices grew quieter as everyone realized something was wrong. My dad walked over to Sawyer, put his hand on my son's shoulder, and yanked him down hard. His mouth close to Sawyer's ear, voice just quiet enough for only people standing nearby to hear. "This chair's not for you. Get down now." Sawyer jumped down to the floor wobbly, eyes wide open, looking up at Grandpa in confusion. My son didn't understand what was happening. Honestly, neither did I. The whole room went quiet for a second. Then forced laughter came from the corner. Someone thinking Harold was joking the way older adults tease their grandkids. I told myself Dad probably drank a little too much, probably just joking in his weird way. But no, Sawyer thought Grandpa was joking too. My son laughed, turned back to look at Harold, and asked in a voice still innocent, "Are you kidding me, Grandpa? I want to sit in the pretty chair to blow out candles." Then Sawyer, with his tiny hands, grabbed onto the chair rail trying to climb up again. I was about to step forward. I swear I was about to step forward. But everything happened too fast. My dad looked down at Sawyer with eyes cold like looking at a bug crawling on something precious. He grabbed the Windsor chair leg and yanked it backward with great force. Sawyer was trying to climb, both hands still gripping the chair rail. When the chair got jerked back, my son completely lost his balance. Sawyer fell face first forward. My son's face slammed straight into the birthday cake. 6 candles fell over. Frosting splattered everywhere on his hair, on his new shirt, on the tablecloth. A still burning candle fell onto the fabric, and someone screamed, rushing to put out the fire. But nobody ran to help my kid, including me. 23 adults stood like statues. Sawyer lay there, face buried in the pile of frosting and cake, and couldn't even cry from shock. Silence covered the room, heavy enough to suffocate, the kind of silence where you can hear the wall clock ticking. I rushed to my son after a tick to get my soul back, knelt, hands shaking, wiping frosting off Sawyer's face. My voice rushed and panicked. "Are you okay? Sawyer, look at me." Look at me. Sawyer slowly looked up, frosting covering his face, his hair, his eyebrows. My son's eyes were red and teary, tears rolling down, mixed with vanilla frosting. Sawyer looked at me, voice trembling and tiny. Dad, why did Grandpa push me? What did I do wrong? Dad? My heart felt like someone was squeezing it tight right at that moment. Paisley was the first one to run over. The little girl knelt next to her cousin without being told to do so. Tiny hands grabbed the hem of her dress. Paisley wiped frosting off Sawyer's cheek while comforting him. Don't cry, Sawyer. I'll blow on it for you, whoosh whoosh. All better. Paisley blew whoosh whoosh on Sawyer's face like kids do when someone falls. Then the little girl held her cousin's hand and said softly, I'm here with you. Don't be scared. Suddenly, Paisley whipped around to look at Grandpa, her child's eyes red with anger on behalf of her cousin. The little girl screamed, voice clear but full of rage. Why did Grandpa do that to Sawyer? Grandpa's really mean. The whole room froze. Weston was the first to speak up. My brother shot up from the sofa, face red with anger, turned to Harold and almost yelled, Dad, what did you do? Sawyer's only 6. My dad turned to look at Weston, eyes ice cold, voice emotionless. Shut up, you don't understand. Weston stepped forward, voice getting louder. I don't understand what? You just yanked a chair, making your own grandson fall face first into cake. During Sawyer's birthday party. What is there not to understand? Harold didn't bother answering my brother. He just stood there, looking down at Sawyer with eyes I can't describe in words, like my son was a stain that needed to be wiped away. I slowly stood up, facing the man I'd called Dad for 36 years. My voice shook, not from fear, but from using all my strength to hold back the rage boiling inside. I looked straight into his eyes and yelled, Apologize to my son, right now. And Harold answered with words I'll never forget for the rest of my life. Harold looked straight into my eyes. Then he opened his mouth, voice cold. I'm never apologizing. This chair's for real blood relatives. He doesn't have the right to sit there. I stood there, trying to process what I just heard. Real blood relatives. Each word kept repeating in my head like a broken record. I asked again, voice still calm because I hadn't understood yet. What do you mean by real blood relatives? My dad smirked. It was the smile of someone who'd just been allowed to say something they'd hidden their whole life. He tilted his head, looked at me like looking at a strange animal in a zoo, then asked back, You really don't know? Or are you pretending not to know? I don't understand what you're saying. My voice started shaking. Harold picked up his bourbon glass, drained it as if savoring this moment. He put the glass down, looked around the room once like making sure he had enough audience, then declared loud enough for all 23 people to hear clearly. For 36 years, I've never believed you're my son. Those words dropped into the middle of the room. Nobody breathed. I stood there, feet nailed to the floor. My ears went fuzzy, as someone had just covered them with thick cotton. The wall clock is still ticking. The air conditioner is still humming. Life kept going around us. But my world had just stopped. My voice was just a whisper. What? Harold repeated slowly, word by word, like explaining to a slow child. You heard me clearly. I don't believe you're my son. Never have. Look at yourself. Black hair, brown eyes, crooked nose. Don't look like anyone in this bloodline. He pointed at Weston standing beside him, voice full of pride. Now Weston, look at him. Brown hair, blue eyes, strong nose. Looks exactly like me. Anyone can see that. Weston flinched like he'd been slapped, face going pale. My brother yelled out, voice breaking because he couldn't believe it. Dad, are you crazy? Callister's my real brother. My dad waved his hand, as if shooing a fly, completely ignoring Weston. He kept looking at me, voice getting more and more cruel. 36 years I had to raise you, watch you walk around my house, eat food I bought, spend money I earned. And now you want your kid sitting on my family's heirloom chair? I looked around the room, searching for denial. Looking for someone, anyone, to say he's drunk, don't listen, or Harold, what are you talking about? But nobody said anything. Uncle Richard looked down at his shoes. Aunt Susan busied herself twisting her wedding ring. Uncle Thomas coughed and turned away. The whole room suddenly found the floor, ceiling, and wall paintings unusually fascinating. They knew. They all knew. Throughout my whole life, they all knew this, and nobody said anything. For 36 years, I wondered what I did wrong. Turns out I didn't do anything wrong. I was just suspected of not being real blood by a man who never bothered to verify. My voice broke, trembling as I asked, "Why? Why didn't you ever tell me? Why didn't you get a test to make it clear?" Harold shrugged, casually answered, "Tell you what? Test for what? You're still here, still freeloading, still..." "Enough!" A voice cut through, rang out from behind me. I turned around. My mom stood there. June, the woman who'd been silent her whole life, was standing up from the sofa. Her face was bright red, and her hands were clenched so tight that her knuckles were white. Sawyer still sat on the floor, frosting still stuck in his hair, tears still flowing. My son looked from me to Grandpa and then to Grandma, not understanding what was happening, but knowing his birthday party had just turned into something terrifying. Paisley still sat next to Sawyer, tiny hand gripping her cousin's tight, like two kids taking shelter together in a storm. My whole life, Mom had never spoken up when my dad treated me differently. For so many years, she silently watched me grow up lacking without saying a word. But today, for the first time, my mom stood up. In the moment my mom stood up, my head spun as if someone had just punched me straight in the temple. Memories from the past came flooding back, but this time they carried a completely different color. Standing in that living room, I was like watching the movie of my life again, except this time someone had turned on the subtitles. I remembered the first time I brought Sawyer to meet Grandpa, when my son was just 3 months old. Harold held the baby up, looked at him for a while, then gently put him back in the crib without saying a word. When Paisley was born, I'd seen him hold his granddaughter for 2 straight hours, singing lullabies and bragging to the whole neighborhood. Back then, I thought he probably liked girls better than boys. Now I understand. He didn't consider Sawyer a real family member. But the most painful memory wasn't about Sawyer. It was about my mom. I remembered a winter night when I turned 9. The sound of fighting from my parents' bedroom echoes through the thin wall. Harold's voice roaring like thunder. "You think I don't know? You think I'm blind?" Then banging, crying. My mom's voice pleading. "I swear to you, I didn't, Harold, I swear." I lay curled up in bed, blanket pulled over my head, pretending I couldn't hear anything. The next morning, my mom wore a turtleneck, even though it was the middle of July, and breakfast happened in silence, as if the night before had never existed. Back then, I didn't understand what they were fighting about. Now I understand. My dad was accusing Mom of something I was the living proof of. I remembered another rare time Harold was pleasant to me. When I was 12, running a high fever, he sat by my bed and put his hand on my forehead to check my temperature. I was so happy I almost cried from getting Dad's attention. Then he mumbled, thinking I was asleep. "Really does look like it. But blood doesn't lie." Back then, I didn't understand what that meant. Now I understand. Even when taking care of me, he was still doubting. After college, when I moved out on my own, I rarely came home. I told myself it was because I was busy studying, working, building my life. But the truth was, I was running away and running from the feeling of being unwanted in my own family, even though I didn't know the reason why back then. Throughout my life, I have blamed myself. Throughout my life, I thought I was the problem. Throughout my life, I have tried to be worthy of love. Turns out that the problem was never with me. The problem was a suspicion that Harold never bothered to verify. He could have gotten a test any time in the past 36 years. One swab, one lab, a few $100. Simple as that. But he didn't because he didn't want to know the truth. My mom stepped into the middle of the room. June looked straight at Harold. Her voice rang out so clearly the whole room had to hold its breath. "All these years I've been silent. Today I'm speaking." She walked over to me, eyes red and teary. Then she did something that stunned me. She pulled my shirt up, exposing my back in front of 23 people in the room. June pointed to the crescent-shaped birthmark on my back, her voice ringing out like making a declaration in court. "Harold, look at this. This birthmark's exactly like yours. Exactly like your father's. Exactly like your grandfather's. For generations of men in this bloodline all had this birthmark in the same spot. If Callister's not your son, then where did it come from?" Harold stood there, face going pale as he'd just been splashed with ice water. It turns out that he'd never known I also had genetic markers from him. But my mom wasn't done. She pulled my shirt down, then turned and walked straight to the old wooden cabinet in the corner of the living room. The cabinet I knew for sure nobody had touched in years, where this family kept things they wanted to forget. June pulled the drawer open, dust flying up thick. She dug through the pile of yellowed papers, then pulled out an envelope with worn corners. She walked straight to Harold and threw it hard at his chest. The envelope fell to the floor, the paper inside slipping out. I saw the bold print, paternity test results. My heart pounded in my chest. June looked at her husband, voice cold as ice. I got the test done when Callister was just 10. When you started treating my son like a stranger. The whole room went dead silent. Someone dropped a glass, and the sound of breaking glass pierced the air, but nobody moved. June continued, her voice shaking with anger. Match. Callister is your biological son. I've kept this paper for years, waiting for the day you'd ask. Waiting for the day you'd face the truth instead of silently torturing our child. Harold's mouth opened, but no sound came out. For the first time in my life, I saw him with nothing to say. But my mom wasn't done. She said through her sobs, "But you never asked. You just stayed silent and treated our son like trash. And me, I was foolish in believing that if you really suspected something, you'd speak up. I thought you were just difficult. I thought you loved Callister in your own way." Then she looked down at the paper on the floor, her voice breaking. "Turns out you didn't want to know the truth. You wanted a reason to hate your own child." I stood there. My ears went fuzzy. My mom had proof in her hands for 26 years. My hands went ice cold. Something broke inside my chest. Not my heart, but something more profound. I turned to look at Mom, my voice hoarse. "You knew. You had proof since I was 10. June turned around, tears starting to flow, her voice pleading. "Son, I thought." I cut her off, not yelling, not screaming, just speaking in a low, muddy voice like talking to myself. 26 years you watched me wonder why Dad hated me. You watched me cry alone in my room, thinking I wasn't worthy of love. You had the answer in a drawer, and you said nothing. In that moment, my mom broke down sobbing. She reached toward me whispering, "My son, I'm sorry, I thought." I stepped back, avoiding her hand like preventing fire. My voice still low, but each word like a knife. "I don't need you protecting me today. I needed you when I was 5, when I cried because Dad wouldn't hug me. I needed you when I was 10, when you had the results in your hand. I needed you when I was 15, 20, 25. My mom collapsed, her shoulders shaking in waves. But I couldn't comfort her. Not because I hated her, but because I had nothing left to give. In that moment, I realized that silence can slowly kill a child, day by day, without lifting a finger. My eyes stopped on the Windsor chair lying overturned on the floor, for legs sticking up to the sky. A thought flashed through my head. After taking a breath to calm down, I grabbed the napkin from the table. The water glass fell to the floor and shattered, water splashing everywhere, but I didn't care. Then I knelt next to Sawyer and used the napkin to gently wipe the frosting off my son's face. Each stroke slow and gentle, like wiping away everything that just happened. Vanilla frosting was stuck all over his hair, eyebrows, and even in his ears. I patiently wiped every bit. Then I leaned close to Sawyer's ear, whispered, "Close your eyes, son. I'm here. Nobody's gonna hurt you anymore." Sawyer obediently closed his eyes. I turned to Paisley, voice gentle. "Paisley, can you hug Sawyer for me for a minute?" Paisley nodded immediately and opened her arms to hug her cousin, as if she were a miniature adult. Weston had moved next to the two kids. My brother put his hand on his daughter's shoulder and nodded slightly in my direction. His eyes seemed to say, "Go ahead. I'll watch the little ones." I stood up. My steps led me toward the Windsor chair, which lay overturned on the floor. I bent down, gripped the chair rail with both hands, and lifted it. The white oak was heavy, and the old varnish smell hit my nose. So many years of holding back. So many years of self-blame. So many years trying to be loved by a man who never considered me his son. I turned around, wound up with my whole body, and threw the chair straight at the wall with all the suppression I'd endured. The crash rang out like thunder before a storm. The back spindles snapped in half and flew out of the frame. The two front legs shot to one corner. The The seat cracked, with a long line running from the center to the edge. Wood pieces fell to the floor. The family photo hanging above also fell, the glass frame hitting the wall before crashing to the ground and shattering into pieces. Glittering glass shards were scattered all over the floor. Harold screamed, voice tearing through the air. No. He rushed toward the wreckage, dropped to his knees, hands shaking, picking up each broken piece of wood. His mouth mumbled something I couldn't hear clearly. Maybe Grandpa's name, perhaps the $12,000, possibly both. I stood there, chest heaving, sweat beading on my forehead. But inside, I was strangely peaceful, like someone had just cut the rope that had been choking me for years. 23 adults still stood motionless. Some covered their eyes with their hands. Others put their hands on their chests to calm their shock. I turned back to Sawyer, knelt at eye level with my son. Sawyer had opened his eyes, looking at me, confused. I smiled, voice light like nothing happened. Chair's broken, son. I'm throwing it away. Sawyer blinked, asked quietly, can it be fixed, Dad? I stroked his hair, answered calmly, no, son, because the chair's broken. When chairs are broken, nobody can sit on them anymore. Not even Grandpa. You understand? Sawyer nodded slowly. My son didn't understand everything, but Sawyer trusted me. For a 6-year-old, sometimes trust in Dad is all that's needed. I picked Sawyer up. The little guy wrapped his arms tight around my neck, face buried in my shoulder. Bending down to pat Paisley's head, I said softly, thanks for staying with him. You're the best big sister ever. Paisley waved at her cousin. Eyes red. Bye, Sawyer. I love you. See you again soon. Weston looked at me. My brother's eyes held many things. Guilt, sadness, and something like respect. My brother nodded slightly, said nothing, but I understood. June still stood there, tears streaming down, choking as she called, Callister. Son, I didn't turn around. Harold still knelt among the broken pieces, hands clutching the snapped wood like holding a loved one's body. I carried Sawyer toward the door and spoke just loud enough for the 23 people in the room to hear clearly. From now on, only people who truly love my son get to be around him. The door closed. I drove home in silence. Sawyer slept slumped in the back seat, frosting still left in his hair, breathing steadily. Streetlights glided past the car window like blurry streaks of light. I thought that was the last time I'd step into that house looking for family love. But life always has its own way of testing people. A few months after the party, my life and Sawyer's life gradually returned to normal. Or at least a new version of normal. That night, as soon as we got back to our little house in the Columbus suburbs, about a 20-minute drive from my parents' house, I blocked Dad and Mom's numbers. No hesitation, no regrets. I only kept in touch with Weston because my brother wasn't at fault in this. But the wound from that night wasn't just in me. It also ate deep into Sawyer. The first week after the party, my son wouldn't sit at the dining table. Every time I pulled a chair out, Sawyer backed away, eyes fearful, mouth stuttering and shaking. Dad, I don't want to sit in chairs. I'm scared of falling. My heart felt like someone was squeezing it tight. That evening, I dragged the dining set to the backyard, took it apart piece by piece and disposed of it. The sound of wood hitting each other rang out in the late night. Neighbors probably thought I'd lost my mind. We ate dinner on the living room floor for 2 straight weeks. I spread a big blanket in the middle of the living room, laid out the food, and called it an indoor picnic. Sawyer giggled, for the first time in days. Gradually, my son agreed to sit on the cheap plastic table and chairs I bought from the supermarket. Every week I let Sawyer video call Paisley. 2 innocent kids. No reason they should bear the consequences of adults' mistakes. Watching my son laugh and play with his cousin through the phone screen, I felt a little relieved. A month later, I threw a make-up birthday party for Sawyer. Just father and son, a small cake from the bakery down the street, 6 flickering candles. After Sawyer blew out the candles, he looked up at me, voice full of hope. Dad, can we invite Paisley over next year? I nodded, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. Life went on like that, peaceful in a way I'd never experienced. Then one evening, the phone rang. Weston's number. My brother didn't beat around the bush. His tired voice came through as soon as I picked up. Bro, Dad's seriously sick. End-stage kidney failure. Doctor says he needs a transplant urgently within a few months. I stayed silent. Weston continued, voice dropping like he was trying to hold something back. I got tested, not compatible. Mom neither. Nobody in the family matches. I still didn't say anything. My brother sighed on the other end, then added softly, I'm not asking you. I just thought you should know. The decision's yours. I answered briefly, I know now, then hung up. Many nights after that, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and couldn't sleep. That man had spent his whole life rejecting me. Now his life was in the hands of the child he never believed was his. Life's sometimes so ironic that if you don't laugh, the only option left is to cry. Finally, I took Sawyer for testing in a quiet manner. Results came back after a week. I held 2 papers in my hands, looked at the bold print and laughed bitterly. A few days later, I put both results in an envelope and mailed them to my parents' address, without any accompanying words. A few days ago, in the late afternoon, I was sitting in the front yard, fixing Sawyer's old bike. My son squatted beside me, holding a wrench to hand to Dad whenever needed, mouth asking about everything under the sun. Sound of a car stopping in front of the gate. I looked up. My dad stood there on the other side of the iron gate. He was much thinner than he had been a few months ago, his skin pale, like that of someone anemic, his hands shaking as he clutched 2 files to his chest. Tears streaming down his wrinkled face, falling drop by drop. My mom stood right next to him, one hand gripping her husband's arm tightly, her shoulders shaking in waves. Sawyer looked up from the bike. My son's clear voice rang out, Dad, there's Grandma and Grandpa. I put the wrench down, stood up, and walked slowly toward the gate. Just stood there, looking through the rusty iron bars. The iron gate lay still between us, like years of distance that couldn't be erased. The moment I saw my parents' aged faces, I couldn't think anymore. Everything seemed to slow down, like in those movies where a character stands at life's crossroads. Sawyer still stood at my feet, tiny hands gripping my pants tight, mouth asking questions I couldn't remember anymore. My son's voice seemed to echo from far away, like an echo from the bottom of a well. Suddenly, I saw myself from back then appear before my eyes, and I realized something. When people want to do something, they'll find a way. When they don't want to, they'll find a reason. My dad had been finding reasons for years. My mom also found reasons to stay silent all that time. And me, I'd spent my whole childhood finding reasons to blame myself for things that weren't my fault. We always find reasons for actions our hearts had already decided on beforehand. If my story can help someone going through something similar, I want you to remember these 3 things. First, never let anyone use suspicion to mistreat you. If they really wanted to know the truth, they'd find a way. Second, protect your children from the hurt you once carried. Don't let the next generation pay for the mistakes of the previous generation. Sawyer will never have to grow up asking, why doesn't Dad love me, as I did? Third, silence is also a choice, and sometimes it causes more damage than the harshest words. Now, I would like to ask you something. If you were in my position, standing in front of this gate, looking at the person who rejected you your whole life coming to you, what would you do? Open the gate or keep it closed? Forgive or let go? Save or leave them be? There's no right or wrong answer here, only your own answer. If the story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to support me. If you have any thoughts, please share them in the comments below. I'll read every single one. Thanks for taking the time to listen to my story. I look forward to seeing you in the following story. You're a broken kid. Your mom's gonna be ashamed of you. Those are the words my sister said to my son. I used to think blood was everything. That no matter what happened, the family would always have each other's backs. That relatives would never intentionally hurt your child. But when I decided to set boundaries and said enough, everything started falling apart. My family fell into a spiral that nobody could have imagined. Each of us had to pay a very steep price for what happened after that. Before I get into the details of this story, let me say thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thanks for taking your valuable time to follow this story. I hope you have a day full of happiness. Give me a like if you want to wish me the same. Hey everyone, I'm Brennan, 34, a civil engineer living in Mesa, Arizona. This story started 1 year ago, with a phone call at 2 a.m. But before I tell you about that call, let me share a bit about my situation. 2 years ago, my wife died in a car accident. Since the day she left without saying goodbye, I've been raising Porter, our 11-year-old son, by myself. Porter's special in his own way. He's smart, really smart, but he's not like other kids. While his classmates run around the playground, my son sits in the library corner with a thick book. He observes a lot, thinks a lot, but rarely says what he's feeling. After his mom died, he withdrew even more. Sometimes I catch him sitting by the window for hours, and I wish I knew what was running through his head. This 4-bedroom house in Mesa is the only thing my wife and I have left besides that kid. My parents live all the way in Albuquerque, New Mexico, almost 5 hours away, so they can't visit very often. But I have my sister Sandra, 4 years older than me, living in Phoenix, just 30 minutes away. Sometimes she'd come by on weekends, bringing apple pie and life stories. I used to think that even though my parents were far away, at least I still had my sister nearby. Until that night. A phone ringing at 2 a.m. never brings good news. A police officer's dry voice informed me that my sister and her 2 kids were at the Phoenix station. Her husband, Malcolm, had been arrested for assaulting her right in front of the 2 little ones. 30 minutes driving through the night, my mind wouldn't stop spinning. When I walked into the station, my heart felt like someone was squeezing it. Sandra sat hunched in the corner of the waiting room, eyes swollen shut, bruised, and the corner of her mouth still had dried blood. Jace, the 12-year-old boy, sat next to his mom, his face cold and expressionless. And Kira, the little 8-year-old, clutched an old, worn teddy bear, eyes staring straight into space like her soul had drifted away somewhere. As soon as she saw me, Sandra looked up with a choked sob, like a lost kid in the supermarket finally seeing their mom. Like she'd been sitting there waiting for family to come for a really long time, waiting for someone to hug her and say everything would be okay. Maybe her marriage to Malcolm had worn her down so much that even a hug from her little brother had become a luxury. She rushed over, both hands gripping my arm tight like she was scared I'd disappear, voice trembling. "Brennan, save me. I don't have anyone else but you." In that moment, looking at my sister with her battered face, looking at the 2 little ones sitting there like 2 silent shadows, I didn't need to think for another second. I said, "Come stay at my place, however long you need." That night, when I brought the 3 of them home, I believed I was doing what any little brother would do. We're family, right? If you don't help each other in tough times, what's the point of being family? I had no idea that from the moment I opened the door to let them in, the absolute nightmare for me and Porter was beginning. Give someone an inch, and they'll take a mile. With Sandra, my sister didn't take a mile. She took the whole house. The first week, everything was like a beautiful dream. Sandra got up early to make breakfast, washed dishes after every meal, and even cleaned the living room spotless. She said her real estate consulting job had to be put on hold because of too much stress. She needed time to recover. I looked at her, feeling sympathy rise. I remembered the sister from years ago who used to give me the last piece of cake in the box, the sister who protected me from bullies in elementary school. The current Sandra was suffering, and I believed she just needed time. In the second week, cracks began to appear. One evening, Sandra complained to me, "The room I'm staying in is too cramped. The 3 of us are squished together. Your Wi-Fi keeps cutting out. Jace can't do his homework." I nodded, promised to upgrade the internet package. But what made me pause was the following sentence. Sandra lowered her voice, glanced toward Porter's room, then asked me, "Does Porter have some problem? Why do I always see him reading alone? Not playing with Jace and Kira?" I wanted to explain that my son didn't have any problems. He was just different. But I swallowed the words. My parents, Richard and Donna, called from Albuquerque and advised me to be tolerant of my sister. "Sandra just went through something horrible, you have to understand," Mom said. At that time, I still thought I was doing the right thing, that my patience would help my sister get back on her feet. In the third week, I came home from work and found my home office occupied. My desk was pushed into the corner, the computer covered with a blanket, and a fold-out bed was taking up the whole middle of the room. Sandra stood there with a smile like everything was obviously supposed to be this way. Jace needs his own space. He's a big boy now. This time I didn't stay quiet. I looked straight into her eyes and said in a demanding voice, "This is my house, Sandra. I can lend you a chair. I can buy extra mattresses. But this office is where I need to get work done to feed this whole household. You move this back today." Sandra stood frozen. Her eyes got red, and tears started rolling. She looked at me like I just slapped her across the face. But this time I didn't soften. I stood there, arms crossed, waiting. Finally, she moved everything back. But from that moment on, the way she looked at me was different, the look of someone who'd just been shown their limits and was quietly calculating. The second month, the retaliation began. Sandra stopped cooking, stopped cleaning, stopped contributing a dime. My parents sent her $800 every week, but I never saw any of it go toward household expenses. Instead, I saw her new nails every week, saw spa bills in the trash can, and me, electric bill, water bill, food, internet, carrying it all alone. But money wasn't the worst part. What hurt me was how Sandra punished me through Porter. Jace started changing. From the quiet boy at the police station, he was now picking on Porter. Started with teasing. "Why do you read all the time? Don't you have any friends?" Then it escalated to grabbing the PlayStation, taking the spot in front of the TV, and stealing the snacks Porter had saved. And Sandra? She sat there watching, didn't say a word. Like watching her son bully my son was exactly what she wanted to see. Kira learned from her brother. The little girl would take Porter's stuff, then blame him. "I didn't take it. Porter's lying." Every time I reminded Sandra to discipline her kids, she looked at me coldly, shot back. "They're traumatized because of their dad, you don't understand. These kids are victims." And Porter? My son gave in to everything. He didn't argue, didn't cry, didn't tell on them. He just quietly went to his room, closed the door, and buried himself in book pages. One night, I was walking past his room when I heard Porter talking to himself. I stopped, pressed my ear to the door. His tiny voice, "Mom, why do they hate me?" My chest felt like someone had punched me really hard. My son was talking to his dead mother. I thought Porter was okay because he didn't cry, didn't complain. I forgot that my son wasn't good at expressing emotions. Also forgot to ask if he agreed to let them stay. Sometimes we adults get so busy doing what we think is right that we forget to ask the kids living under the same roof for their opinions. He endured in his own way, silently, and built up pressure. Like a ticking time bomb, I couldn't see the clock hands moving. And that bomb went off on a Friday night in the 4th month, right in the middle of a family dinner. That Friday night, after 4 months of my sister living with her 2 kids and us, I had made up my mind. Many nights before that, I lay tossing and turning, thinking, maybe I'd sit down and have a serious talk with Sandra after dinner. Perhaps I'd suggest she find a small apartment nearby. I could help with rent for the first few months. Maybe we'd part ways peacefully, still be siblings, still see each other every holiday. I had prepared what I wanted to say, even practiced in my head how to start the conversation as gently as possible. But life never waits for you to be ready. The 5 of us sat around the dinner table as usual. Roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, salad. A normal dinner. I planned to wait until after we finished eating, then pull Sandra aside for a private conversation. But right from the start of the meal, I could tell something was different. Porter didn't bring a book to the table like usual. He sat quietly, eyes looking down at his plate, shoulders slightly tense, like he was preparing for something. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but before I could open my mouth, everything had already started. On the platter in the middle of the table was just one last chicken leg. I knew that chicken leg was Porter's. My son had a habit of saving the best bite for the end of the meal, exactly like me when I was little. Back then, I used to hide the last piece of chocolate in the fridge and wait until late at night to sneak and eat it, because the anticipation made it taste 10 times sweeter. Porter was the same way. Throughout the meal, he'd occasionally glance at that chicken leg like he was counting down to the moment he could enjoy it. Then Jace reached toward the platter. But this time Porter was faster. My son grabbed the chicken leg before Jace could touch it. For the first time in 4 months, Porter didn't give in. Jace froze for a second in surprise. Then he glared at Porter, voice nasty. Give it here. You've eaten enough. Porter didn't let go. He looked straight into Jace's eyes, voice strangely calm. This one's mine. The whole dinner table went quiet. I saw Sandra stop chewing, her eyes staring at Porter like she couldn't believe her ears. Kira broke the silence. The little girl chimed in, voice whining like always. Jace wants it. Just share like you always do. Porter still gripped the chicken leg tight. He turned to look at Kira, then back at Jace, voice still calm. No, not this time. In that moment, I realized this wasn't the same Porter from 4 months ago. His eyes didn't have that resignation anymore. For months of giving in, all of it built up, just waiting for one drop to overflow the cup. And that drop was the chicken leg. Jace yanked hard. Porter held tight. In the split second of chaos, the food plate flipped over, and the water glass spilled all over Kira's dress. The little girl screamed, then burst into tears. I quickly stood up, voice stern. You kids stop right now. But before I could say another word, Sandra had slammed her hand down on the table, shot up. The slam was so loud that all the glasses shook. Enough! She pointed straight at Porter's face, eyes blazing, said loudly, I told you, this kid really does have problems. I opened my mouth to stop her, but Sandra didn't give me the chance. She poured out like a burst dam. He doesn't know how to behave with other people. He's cold. He's weird. No mom to teach him, so that's how he turned out. My ears started ringing. Sandra still wasn't done. She stepped forward, snatched the chicken leg from Porter's hand, then threw it straight onto the floor. The piece of meat bounced out and rolled around on the cold tile. Then she bent down, her face just inches from my son's, grinding out each word. Listen here. You need to be sent to a camp where they can teach you from scratch how to treat your housemates properly. If your mom were still alive, she'd be ashamed of giving birth to someone like you. Time seemed to stop. Porter didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't tremble. He just slowly let his hands drop, pushed back his chair, and stood up, then walked to his room, his back straight as a board, each step steady like a robot. The bedroom door closed, not a sound. I stood there, my chest feeling like someone was squeezing it shut. Jace and Kira sat still like two statues. Kira had stopped crying, eyes wide, looking at her mom. Not the way a child looks at their mother, but the way a kid looks when they first realize their mom can be that scary. The moment I heard Porter's bedroom door close, I snapped awake. I took an intense breath, trying to contain the rage boiling in my chest. Then I turned to look at Sandra, voice shaking but clear. Go to his room and apologize to my son. Now. Sandra didn't budge at all. She stood there, head held high like she was the one who'd been insulted. Her eyes still blazing red, not an ounce of remorse, voice defiant. I told the truth. You don't know how to raise your kid, so that's why he turned out like that. I'm not apologizing. She stepped closer to me, voice getting louder. Your wife's dead. You're raising him alone. Look what he's become. You should send him to a discipline camp to straighten him out. I stood there listening to her tear me apart. Each sentence is like a knife cutting into my chest. But I didn't argue back. I waited for her to finish, then spoke up, voice cold as ice. Are you done? Sandra stopped short. I looked straight into her eyes, grinding out each word. You have 30 days to move out of my house. After hearing that, Sandra stood frozen for a few seconds. Then she burst out laughing coldly, voice full of sarcasm. 30 days? Are you kicking me out? Did you forget I'm your sister? I didn't waver, shot back immediately. 30 days is because of Jace and Kira. If it were just you, I'd give you 10 minutes. Sandra changed tactics immediately. She screamed, voice whining. You're kicking me out? Fine. I'll call the police. I'll tell them you've been abusing the 2 kids and me for months. I still stood firm, voice unwavering. Go ahead and call. I have cameras in the house. I have receipts proving who's been paying for everything here for the past 4 months. Go ahead and call, I'll wait. Sandra went silent. I saw her eyes darting back and forth, like she was calculating her next move. The room sank into heavy silence. Jace and Kira still sat there, hunched over, eyes staring down at the table, not daring to look up. Then suddenly, Sandra's voice softened completely. Fine. 30 days. I'll go. She turned and walked toward her room. But at the door, she stopped, turned her head to look at me with a cold smile. But you should recheck the papers on this house. Little brother. I didn't get to ask what that meant before she slammed the door shut. That night, after Jace and Kira had quietly gone to their room with their mom, I stood outside Porter's door for a long time before I dared to knock. When I walked in, I found him sitting on his bed, his back to the door, looking out at the dark window. I sat down next to him, not knowing where to start. Porter didn't turn around. After a long while, his voice came out, small as a breath. Dad, why did Aunt Sandra say Mom would be ashamed of me? My chest felt like someone was tearing it apart piece by piece. I pulled him into my arms and hugged him really tight. Those small shoulders trembled in my embrace. But I didn't have an answer. I could only hug him tight as if I let go he'd shatter. Couldn't sleep that night, not because of my anger at Sandra, but because her last words kept echoing in my head like an alarm bell. What was she hiding? In the past 4 months, what had she done to my house? Around 10 p.m., after I was sure Porter was asleep, I sat alone in my office, thinking about Sandra's words. I opened the filing cabinet where I kept all the essential documents. The house deed, Porter's birth certificate, insurance contracts, the things a widowed man has to manage by himself. My heartbeat sped up when I realized something wasn't right. The home insurance file was gone. Porter's birth certificate copy was missing, too. I searched through the whole cabinet, checked every drawer. Nothing. Someone had taken them. Then I saw the stack of mail on the desk. Last week I asked Sandra to bring in letters because I got home late from work. I opened them and went silent. This month's electric bill had 2 names, Brennan and Sandra. A letter from the bank about changing my contact information, which I never requested. A letter from the insurance company confirming they'd added a new beneficiary. My hands started shaking. What was Sandra doing with my life? I grabbed the stack of papers and went down to the living room to find her, but Sandra was already sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. I threw the stack of bills on the table in front of her, trying to keep my voice calm. Explain this. Sandra glanced at the pile of papers, then looked up. A flash of surprise crossed her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure and answered. Explain what? I don't understand what you're talking about. I pointed to the electric bill, voice starting to lose patience. Why is your name on my house bill? And where are the documents from my cabinet? Sandra was quiet for a few seconds. Then she sighed, put her phone down, looked up at me with eyes I'd never seen before. No longer the eyes of my sister, but the eyes of someone who'd just had their mask ripped off. She stood up, voice shifting from defensive to bitter. You want to know why? Fine. I'll tell you. She stepped toward me, eyes blazing red, voice full of resentment. You have a big house worth almost $500,000. You have a stable job. Your wife died, but she left you everything. And me? What do I have? Then she continued, voice getting louder. My husband cheated on me, beat me up. I lost my job. I have nothing. I come ask to stay at your house, and you won't even spare a home office for my son to sleep in. I stood there, looking at her, not believing my ears. I asked again, so you secretly took my documents? What are you planning to do? Sandra didn't answer. She turned away and stayed silent. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm calling the police. What you did is illegal. At the mention of the police, Sandra whipped around. For the first time, I saw panic in her eyes. She rushed over, grabbed my arm. Voice completely changed. Wait, Brennan. We can talk this out as siblings. I'll give back all the documents. I'll call to have those names removed from the bills. Give me more time. I'll find somewhere else to live. I looked at her hand gripping my arm tightly. I pulled her hand away, voice cold and final. 30 days. You'll return all the documents tonight. Tomorrow morning, I'm calling to check all the bills and accounts. If there's anything else suspicious, I'm calling the police immediately. Sandra stood there, tears streaming down, but I didn't trust those tears anymore. Finally, she nodded, voice getting small. Fine. 30 days. She turned and walked to her room, but right before stepping in, she stopped, turned to look at me. No more tears. At the time, I still thought that was the final limit. But what Sandra did next, I'll never forgive. Sandra kept her word. The morning after our confrontation, she put all the documents on the kitchen table without saying a word. I checked each one. Everything was there. I called the electric company, the water company, and the bank. Everything had been restored to my name. Watching her shuffle around the house like a shadow, I even felt cruel. Some nights I'd wake up, wondering if I was turning into another version of Malcolm. If I were cornering my own sister, pushing a woman who was already broken deeper into the abyss. Then I saw how she treated the two kids, and the sympathy in me went cold. One evening, I walked past Jace's room and heard Sandra hissing from inside. I lost everything because of you kids. If you hadn't been troublemakers, hadn't caused problems, I wouldn't have had to beg my own brother. Jace and Kira didn't argue back. They stayed silent, like two small animals trying to shrink into the shadows to avoid the predator. From that night on, the two kids started avoiding their mom. They tiptoed around the house, held their breath whenever Sandra stepped out of her room. And what surprised me most was that they started getting closer to Porter. I only found out later what had happened. Right after that night when the chicken leg got thrown on the floor, after I went to bed, Jace had knocked on Porter's door. The boy stood there, eyes looking down, voice trembling. I'm sorry. Those times before, I didn't want to do that. Porter didn't say anything. He just opened the door a bit wider, like a silent invitation. Kira changed, too. Whenever Sandra started to get angry, the little girl would sneak over to Porter's room, curl up in the corner of his bed, and hug her old teddy bear. Porter didn't chase her away. He just kept reading his book, occasionally glancing over like he wanted to say, "It's safe here." Three kids found each other in the middle of the adult storm. On day 29, Sandra stepped out of her room with a completely different face. No more dark shadow. No more hateful eyes. She even smiled when she poured coffee for me. Then she stopped next to me, voice light as a breeze. "Tomorrow's the last day, isn't it, little brother?" I didn't answer, but the back of my neck went cold. I didn't sleep a wink that night. Sandra was too calm, too relieved, like someone who'd just found the way out of a maze. The next morning, day 30, I understood why she was smiling. That morning, Sandra got up early to make pancakes for the whole family. First time in a month of silence. She even drizzled maple syrup and arranged strawberries into smiley faces on each plate, as our mom used to when we were little. Jace and Kira ate in silence, occasionally glancing at their mom with unease. The instincts of kids who'd lived too long in chaos told them something wasn't right. Porter was the same way. He observed Aunt Sandra with suspicious eyes. But me, I didn't see anything. Sandra might have accepted it. Perhaps this was her way of making peace before leaving. Before I stepped out the door, Sandra called after me, voice gentle like when we were kids, and she used to call my name. "Brennan, can I pick up Porter after school today? I want to take the three kids for ice cream, like my way of apologizing before I move out." I turned to look at her. Her eyes were clear, her smile peaceful. My heart softened. Maybe I'd been too harsh with her. Perhaps she really wanted to end everything peacefully. I nodded and drove to work. At 4 p.m., I called home. No one answered. Called Sandra. Number unreachable. The home cameras were utterly cut off. I drove home like a madman, praying I was overreacting. Maybe Sandra's phone was dead, but the door was unlocked. Sandra's car wasn't in the garage anymore. I ran upstairs and pushed open Sandra's door. Empty. Closet wide open, completely bare. On the pillow was just a folded piece of paper. My hands shook so much I could barely hold the paper. "Brennan, I'm sorry. I have no other way. Don't look for me." For 30, the phone rang, unknown number. Picked up and my world collapsed. Sandra's voice came through, but it wasn't the sister I knew. She was sobbing, each sob like a knife cutting. "Brennan, forgive me," I screamed. "Where are you? Where's my son?" Sandra didn't answer. She kept crying, voice broken like someone drowning. "I'm so tired, Brennan. I can't take it anymore. My husband hurt me. My little brother kicked me out. Our parents are far away. Who do I have? What do I have?" I tried to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was about to explode. "Listen to me. I'm sorry. I'll help you. Just tell me where you are." Sandra's voice suddenly went cold, calm in a terrifying way. I'm ending everything today, Brennan. I'm taking the kids with me. At least they won't have to live miserably like me. At least they'll have their mom with them. The world around me spun. I screamed into the phone. Sandra, don't. Listen to me. Then I heard Porter's voice. Calm. Clear, Dad. We're near the lake. I see a sign that reads Tempetown Lake. White boat. Before I could say more, the phone was cut off. I called 911 sounding like a madman. Then called my parents in Albuquerque. Mom cried as soon as she heard. Dad just said one sentence. Then hung up, we're coming right now. Police traced Sandra's phone after 2 hours. I stood for 2 hours at the boat dock, looking out at the black lake, praying with everything I had. Then I saw it. The small white boat was drifting slowly in the middle of the lake. The rescue team approached by speedboat. I stood on shore, heart pounding so hard my ears rang, only hearing the sound of blood rushing in my head. Through the police binoculars, I saw Sandra sitting at the back of the boat, holding Kira in her arms. Jace sat curled in a corner, eyes staring at his mom, and Porter, my son, sat facing Sandra, back straight, eyes never leaving the crying woman. All 3 kids were wearing life jackets. I later found out that Porter was the one who convinced Sandra to let everyone wear life jackets. He said in a calm voice, Aunt Sandra, the water's really cold. Let us wear life jackets. Then you can do whatever you want. My son was only 11 years old, and in that life or death moment, he was calmer than any adult. On the boat, Jace was the one who broke the silence. The boy crawled in front of his mom, knelt, voice shaking so much that each word seemed broken. Mom, I'm scared. I'm begging you. I promise I'll be good. I'll do everything you want. Please don't. Kira sobbed in Sandra's arms. Her crying wasn't the crying of a spoiled child anymore, but the crying of a small creature afraid of dying. Mom, I want to go home. I want to go back to Uncle Brennan's house. I promise I'll be good. Mom. Porter looked at Sandra, didn't cry, didn't beg. He just said one sentence, voice calm but each word like a nail being hammered. Aunt Sandra, you're sick. You need help. This isn't you. You're not this kind of person. Sandra looked at the 3 kids, and she collapsed. Sandra let Kira go, covered her face, and screamed like a wounded animal, then cried. Cried like a lost child. Cried like someone just waking up from a long nightmare. The rescue team brought the boat to shore. Each child was carried out. My son stepped onto shore, back still straight, face still calm. But when he saw me, when his eyes met mine, everything broke open. Porter ran over, threw himself into my arms, and cried, sobbed. 2 years after his mom died, he'd never cried. He kept everything inside, silent, enduring. But that night on this cold dock, my son finally got to cry, and I cried with him. Sandra was put on a stretcher. She didn't resist, didn't scream. She lay there, eyes looking up at the starry night sky, tears flowing backward down her temples. My parents arrived just in time, 5 hours of nonstop driving. Mom was still wearing pajamas, and Dad still had slippers on. They rushed out of the car and ran to the dock. Mom saw Sandra on the stretcher. Her knees buckled right there in the parking lot. She called out to my sister through her sobs. My daughter, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were suffering like this. Dad helped Mom up, but he was shaking too. He turned to me, eyes blazing red, voice broken into pieces. We didn't see it. Nobody saw that our little girl was drowning. That night, Sandra wasn't taken to the police station. She was transferred directly to the psychiatric ward of the hospital. It's been a year since that night. I drove to the Phoenix police station to pick up my sister and 2 nephews and bring them home. A year with so many events that sometimes I still can't believe it actually happened. After that night at Tempetown Lake, Sandra was diagnosed with severe depression. The doctor explained that her illness wasn't new. It had been silently building up for years. Untreated postpartum depression. The years of being abused by her husband. Those hits to the head, to her body day after day, had left damage not just on her skin but in her brain. When she lost everything, when even her last family member turned their back, her mind completely collapsed. By law, Sandra's actions were classified as endangering children. But because she was diagnosed with severe mental health issues, the court decided to place her in mandatory treatment instead of prison. Her parental rights were also temporarily suspended during treatment. The first time I visited her in the hospital, Sandra sat by the window, hair cut short, eyes looking out at the empty courtyard. She'd lost a lot of weight, her shoulders trembling under the pale blue patient gown. When she saw me, she didn't say anything, just cried. I sat down next to her and didn't say anything either. Maybe I was angry then. Maybe I was full of regret. Perhaps I was blaming myself for not seeing that she was drowning. All of it mixed into something I couldn't name. Jace and Kira were temporarily placed with my parents in Albuquerque while waiting for the court's decision. But I knew my parents couldn't handle raising them long-term. Mom was in the severe stage of vestibular disorder, and Dad was almost 70, and he couldn't take care of 2 traumatized kids by himself. 3 months later, the court officially appointed me as guardian for Jace and Kira. The day I drove to Albuquerque to pick up the 2 kids, Porter came with me. For 5 hours, he sat quietly reading his book, occasionally looking up at me, then back down. When we got back to Mesa, Porter led Jace and Kira upstairs. He opened the door to the room I'd fixed up. The room that used to be Sandra's bedroom now had 2 single beds, 2 desks, and a new bookshelf. Jace stood at the door, eyes wide. He turned to Porter, voice trembling. "This room is for us to share?" Porter nodded, voice still cold but no longer distant. "Yeah, you sleep on the left bed. I like the right side." Then he led Kira to the room next door, the room that used to be Porter's. I'd repainted the walls light pink, hung curtains with butterflies, and placed her old teddy bear right in the middle of the bed. Kira stood there hugging her bear tight, tears streaming down. She turned to me, tiny voice. "Uncle Brennan, can I really stay here?" I knelt to her eye level and whispered, "This is your home now, Kira." And just like that, my 4-bedroom house wasn't quiet anymore. It had laughter, the sound of fighting over the TV remote, the sound of feet running up and down the stairs, the sound of Kira chattering about school, the sound of Jace and Porter arguing about games. Porter, the kid who never knew how to make friends, now had a roommate. He was still quiet, still loved reading books. But every night before bed, I heard the 2 boys whispering in their room, sometimes even giggling. All 3 went to see a psychologist every week. Those wounds don't heal in a day, but they were healing. One evening, Kira was helping me clear the table when she dropped a glass. It shattered on the floor. She stood frozen, face pale, waiting to get yelled at. Porter came downstairs, saw what had happened, and immediately got the broom. He sat down to pick up each piece, voice calm. "It's okay. Let me clean it up. You stand still so you don't cut your feet." Kira looked at Porter, then suddenly ran over and hugged my son tight. Porter stood there, still holding the broom, not knowing what to do. But he didn't push her away. Jace walked by, saw the scene, and grinned, teasing, "You got hugged, Porter. Just accept it." Porter glanced at me. In his eyes was something different, as if he were learning to open his heart after years of keeping that door locked tight. And Sandra? She's still in treatment. Every month, I take all 3 kids to visit my parents. The first few times, the kids were scared and didn't dare get close. But gradually, when they saw their mom was calmer, could smile again, they started holding her hand. I don't know what the future holds. Don't know if Sandra will fully recover. But I know one thing, now the 4 of us are a family. If you're watching this story, I want to share a few things. 1, look closely at the people around you. Sometimes, the most hurt person is the one who never speaks up. 2, if you see a child suffering in silence, don't think they're okay just because they don't cry. There are kids like Porter who keep everything inside until they can't take it anymore. And 3, setting boundaries with family doesn't mean you don't love them. Blood isn't a license for someone to hurt you or your children. If you were me, would you dare to confront your own sister? Would you be willing to open your heart to raise 2 kids who used to be on the other side of the battle? I don't have the correct answer for everyone. I only know my own answer. If the story touched you, please like and subscribe to the channel. Could you share your thoughts in the comments? Thanks for listening. I look forward to seeing you again.